Good times and great music at 2NURFM 103.7. Hello, Mark Rook with you this morning as we take a look at some of the things happening in the world of education. We do that with our Professor of Education from the University of Newcastle, John Fischetti, who was also had a very busy weekend, made at the University of Newcastle Open Day. You were in at the New Space area in town, so we were at the Callaghan campus. But what was the vibe like in the city there?
It was incredible, Mark. It's so great, first of all, to see people back by droves and to see all of the students and prospective students gearing up to sort of try to figure out what their dreams are. And I think some dreams came true that day. Really good turnout from this community. Come on board. There's so many great programs, and I was really excited to be part of it.
And what's I know we haven't got the exact numbers here, but in terms of the general age group of potential students coming through, is it still the upper end of year 12, or are we getting a bit younger for people to start to figure it out earlier on? What was that vibe there?
Yes, so coming to Open Day, it's changed over the last few years. It's probably a mix of year 12 students who are still considering options, but it's increasingly more year 10 and 11 and their parents to be able to start to look ahead. With early offers out there across all of the world, but particularly now in Australia, most of the year 12 students have already kind of locked in their preferences, at least at the top of the scale. The top students already kind of know where they want to go and what they want to do. So there's much more exploration by younger. So this is really future students and a lot of mature age students who don't have degrees coming to really test the waters of whether they really will be successful, and lots and lots and lots of good people. So I think we've got a great future for next year coming.
All right, so next couple of years, in fact, looking pretty good there. Let's diverge a little bit younger here, John, with some of the NAPLAN results that are out. The way that that's been calibrated and looked at and viewed, that has changed a little bit. How's that reflecting in some of the results, and what are some of the major changes there?
Yep. Thanks, Mark. Well, you know, the NAPLAN is the National Assessment of Literacy and Numeracy. It's held in years 3, 5, 7, and 9. And in year 9, there's also a writing assessment. Over the last several years, and of course, we had a pandemic interruption where for 1 year things were parked, and then another year it was really different. But generally, Australian students have done pretty well in the years 3 and 5, and then a little less well 7 and 9, which you can predict as kids get older. And if you don't have the basic skills, they kind of wane off. But they've recalibrated the whole scale now, so it's almost impossible to say what we can do from previous results. However, there is some good news, and then a couple of alarm bells have gone off around the nation as well.
Yeah, all right. So what are some of the areas where we're up, some of the areas where we're down, and how do those stats compare with the general flow of checks and balances from other ways of measuring?
Any of the listeners who'd want to get into the detail, first email me, I'll send you the scale they're using, or you can Dr. Google it and figure it out. But there are bands that are being used now for upper and then middle and then lower end of performance. They did the test a little earlier, and the results came back a little earlier, so teachers could actually use the data, which makes sense. If you go to the doctor and they tell you your blood pressure's up, but they don't tell you till next year, that doesn't really help you today. So at least it's getting more formative, which you might have heard me use that word a few times on air, Mark. The top students are doing pretty well. They're doing world-class level of proficiency. And those in the middle, because of the new scale, don't look as successful in some of the basic literacy and numeracy. They could do better. The real alarming part is that about 10% of our students actually need extra assistance now, that they were performing in a way that you could say they were illiterate or innumerate, which is not a really good recipe for success in 2023.
No, I mean, if you're in that area that we can possibly call you illiterate at a very basic sense, that's troubling. When you say that a lot of this has been recalibrated, so these numbers are what they are now. Because NAPLAN's one of those things that some people either love it, like want to live and die by it, and some are very not so much. Will the way that it's changed, will that bring more people to value it, or you're either in one camp or the other?
I think it's like if you've ever heard of great inflation where teachers give away marks. They've readjusted the scale, so it's a little firmer results. I think what we can say for those students at the bottom end is a little alarming, mostly in rural and remote areas, a higher percentage of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander kids than would make sense, disproportionately higher, and students with identified special needs. You might also think in the western parts of Sydney and in some of the areas that are hard hit economically, that this is a combination of variables. This isn't about poor teaching. This is about a society now for people on the edge where their children are on the fringe. So For many families now, they're deciding between rent money and food. They've dropped supplemental care. Many kids haven't been to the dentist or the eye doctor. And for many of them, they don't come from a literacy background because their parents haven't had a successful education. What I worry about in the past, for those kids struggling through, there was probably a fallback somewhere out there in the sector where you could get a pretty good job and have a pretty good life. If you're going to be a marginal student and marginally successful, there is no pathway for you that I can see because ChatGPT can give me a credit essay in about 12 seconds. So we got to get these kids back on track. Meanwhile, just in the last few days, a report on how the Gonski funding was spent, 2 years ago on 2NUR, the Gonski money was designed to give extra funding to schools that had a disproportionate number of kids who needed extra boosts. That money has not actually gone in the numbers it should have been to the schools where it might be needed the most. So some government-funded schools with a high proportion of children from disadvantage have not received that funding, which could be the extra tutor, the extra support, the extra reading software, the extra boosts that could help them move their proficiency up. So generally, the NAPLAN scores are okay. The recalibration means they're not as good as they were, but that's just sort of in the new math they're using. But I'm really worried about the most vulnerable. And the pandemic meant those kids spent 2 years in clunky school, Mark, where they were doing a lot of it on Zoom and figuring it out. And if you come from a family that didn't have wireless, didn't have a laptop, didn't have a parent who could help you, or an older sister who could stay home, I'm worried about those kids.
Particularly when you look at how technology is changing, and I know that's the old trope, but it really is. I saw somebody quoted yesterday evening, a tech expert, that said that the AI within about a year or so from now will have IQ levels well above Einstein. So that's great for those in that sector, but for those at the very other end, the jobs are not going to be there.
And by year 9, if you're falling behind, you can see how the pathway to those STEM careers, those AI kind of inventive careers, or just the jobs in the 100 that are coming, incredible in healthcare, hydrogen, tourism, defense, and in education, the health industries. Oh my gosh, you're going to have to be ready to go. You can't be behind. And that's where I'm worried that we got to provide those extra boosts for those schools. And just what we talked about last time, Mark, we're going to have quality teachers in those situations, because what you know is that there's a teacher shortage now of 2,100 high school teachers in New South Wales. And if we don't have a math teacher in front of a math class in our secondary schools, a good person's there, but they're not going to be able to boost these kids where they need to go.
Yeah, you need the right people with the right skill set to get you in the right places at the end. All right, John, thanks as always. We'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, Mark.
Our Professor of Education from the University of Newcastle, John Fischetti, on 2NUR FM 103.7.
A broadcast service of the University of Newcastle.